So just repeat before introducing Tithi about how long will the educational be and the possibility to ask question afterwards, etc.
Hello, Jonathan. I'm here. I think you were looking for me.
Yeah, Alex, it was just to be sure, what profile do you want to interpret from? Is that Alex Merlo or just Alex? No, Alex is the French one. Sorry, you only have one this time. Perfect. I'll just add you then. Perfect, good work.
Hello.
Hi.
You can, you can
Yeah.
hear me? Good.
Inma, maybe you should just announce when we will start.
Okay. So we will be starting in like 5 minutes, maybe. If this is okay for everybody, especially for Tithi.
I'm here. Yeah, that's fine.
So, hello everybody. My name is Imma, and thank you for participating in this new session of Rebel Revolutionary Youth Seminar. Remember that you can choose the channel of your language at the bottom right in interpretation. The Chinese channel is for Italian and the Japanese one for Danish. Today we'll have an educational of feminist perspectives using social reproduction theory to understand the present by Tithi Bhattacharya. Tithi is a Marxist feminist investigator, professor in Purdue University in the USA, and spokeswoman for BDS movement. She's also author of Social Reproduction Theory, Remapping Class, Resenting Oppression, and Feminism for the 99%, along with Cynthia Rusa and Nancy Fraser. So, Tithi, please, would you like to start?
Hi, comrades. Thank you very much for having me in these troubled times. I'm so happy to be in this space with you, and I want to acknowledge the various challenges you must have had in the last few months. And I'm sure, given the group I'm speaking with, how hard you have organized and fought against the various challenges in your own countries. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to hearing from you. I also want to especially thank, excuse me, my doorbell is ringing. I have to see, sorry. The joys of working from home. So sorry about that. So I wanted to especially thank the translators and to comrades who are doing this hard work of translating my work. And I want to thank Martin and the others for inviting me. So this is an educational on the current crisis from a feminist perspective. And I think the crisis itself has been a real educational for all of us. The pandemic, for me, has acted as an archaeologist and an archivist. An archaeologist because it has revealed the existing fault lines of race, gender, and class. And it is an archivist in a way because it rages across these fault lines, but it retains the memory of these glaring inequalities. So let me explain. How is this revealing already existing fault lines? In every country, women earn less, they save less, and so they're more likely to hold part-time, low-income jobs without unions or other kinds of support. And that naturally means that as the pandemic and the economic downturn hits their specific country, women are the first to let go, the first to suffer. Normally, in an economic crisis, male-dominated jobs like manufacturing or mining have been traditionally the first to go. But this time around, it's the opposite. In parts of the United States, more women than men are filing for unemployment. We also need to consider that the majority of single-parent households are women, and the majority of refugees and internally displaced individuals around the world are women and girls. So even if the virus has a democratic epidemiology in that it can affect anyone from Prince Charles to Jair Bolsonaro, the effects of the virus are far from democratic. Indeed, its effects ripple through the family and the larger social whole. In the US, more than 41 million workers have children under 18. Almost all of them have lost childcare as a result of the pandemic. At the peak of the closures, 55 million students in public schools around the country were affected. An additional 5 million younger children in daycare and preschool were affected. In normal times, inadequate childcare is the equivalent of a 5% pay cut for parents, and now it is much worse. How is the virus acting like an archivist or a historian? Because the response to this crisis by governments is to carry on with the habits they have acquired under manic neoliberalism, to continue to shift responsibilities to individual families and within those families onto women. The clearest proof of this is 40% of childcare programs in the US now say that they will have to close permanently without outside help. Imagine what the landscape will look like as we go into the fall with all of the workplaces reopening. But all our rulers and their newspapers are worried not about this immense harm to our lives, but about the economy. I'm exhausted from reading and hearing about how the coronavirus is affecting the economy, how it's hurting the economy, how we need to save the economy. Reading the mainstream news outlets, you would think that it was the economy that was being evicted, incarcerated, forced to work, fired, or dying. Welcome to capitalism, where things are valued more than life, and thing-making, that is profit-making, is valued more than life-making. Around the world, governments only started to respond to the virus once its spread was already impossible to control by their respective medical infrastructures. It has been instructive to see how stubbornly capitalism refused to protect life while panicking over stocks. Indeed, the initial callousness of our rulers to the virus was in part due to the fact that the most affected were our elderly. That is, people who we may love, but who for capitalism have already outlived their use. They do not work, that is, they do not produce profit. They draw pensions, benefits, that is, they take from profit. The short-term vision that defines capitalism failed to see that unless we flattened the curve, we could all be affected. If the hospitals became full of the elderly, what would happen if the 40-year-old had a heart attack or the 11-year-old developed something potentially fatal? I was just talking to an oncologist, a feminist oncologist friend of mine here in the US, and she said that because they did not close the economy early enough and they did not close for long enough, what that meant is that primary testing for cancer and screening for cancer in the US have been now completely delayed because the virus is raging, and so all the hospitals are mainly dealing with COVID patients. This means, she said, that when testing and screening for cancers restart back again, the cancer may have progressed much further along and might be harder to treat. So what do we mean when we say capitalism pits life-making against profit-making? The social capacities with which we make life and the institutions with which we maintain life and satisfy our needs have always been undervalued by capitalism. This is why life-making services such as health, education, and public transport always receive less funding than defense and crime, and are always the first to be privatized or underfunded. Even food production under capitalism is conducted strictly on the basis of profit margins rather than hungry humans. During a devastated famine in the place of my, the state of my birth, Bengal, in 1943, 42-43, the racist British government continued to export over 70,000 tons of rice annually to maintain its trade profits. An estimated 3 million people died in this famine. In the same way, only in our capitalist dystopia can a candidate running for the highest office of US government publicly say he's going to veto a bill which guarantees health care to everyone, and this during a pandemic, something Joe Biden promised to do as a president of the United States if a Medicare for All bill were to come to him for ratification. The US is incidentally one of the countries least equipped to deal with a pandemic. And it is interesting, if we think about it, that the three countries with the most authoritarian racist heads of state, Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, and Narendra Modi, are suffering the most. Why is the US least equipped? For many reasons. First, the US outright denies healthcare to a vast majority of people. Second, it ties healthcare to employment. So when people lose their jobs, as they will in a recession, they will have no healthcare. Third, it encourages its people to think that only two categories of the social whole are sacred, the individual and the institution of the bourgeois nuclear family, although offering no support to members of that family. Issues of public good and social good have been either deliberately ignored or actively discouraged by the US politicians. The result is we now live in a society with 2.7 hospital beds per 1,000 people and 120 guns per 100 civilians. As life-making work is devalued by capitalism, so are workers who perform these tasks. Nurses, teachers, home care workers, farm workers, cleaners, without whose work it would be impossible to maintain life, are those very people who are paid the lowest wages and have the worst work conditions. A pandemic tragically clarifies both the importance of life-making work and the perils of devaluing it. Take the case of home healthcare workers in the US, whose work has become vital during this crisis. Nearly 90% of home healthcare workers and nurses' aides in the US who work in nursing homes, hospices, and with the elderly in general are women. More than half of them are women of color. On an average, they earn less than $10 an hour with no paid sick time or healthcare benefits. More often than not, these women do not like to take time off as they feel they're needed by their vulnerable patients. These are the people most in contact with the folks who have the highest chance of suffering from the virus. Those who are not then low-wage women of color safe? Hardly. 40 years of neoliberalism may have taught us to think that one can keep oneself protected with a magical barrier of individuality, but the reality is both very different and much more social. The social institutions that were gutted in order for neoliberal austerity to breathe means that these very low-wage women that one may try to avoid are now forced to go to work since austerity made sure that their wages are low, their benefits non-existent, and their housing always at risk. This means women at the front lines of care cannot afford to socially isolate themselves because they cannot afford to lose their jobs. And this obviously means that the pandemic continues to spiral out of control. It is a clarifying tragedy that we are living through right now. In the spring, the pandemic temporarily forced governments and industry to direct production and policy towards the one thing that they have always deprioritized, which is human life. The case of Italy is a perfect example of this before and after picture of capitalism's priorities. Public funding for healthcare in Italy was reduced in the last decade by about 37 billion euros. Most of these cuts took place from 2010 to 2015. Over this decade, 359 hospitals were closed while smaller hospitals abandoned. Then, when the virus started stalking the country, Italy's prime minister ordered the closing down of all productive activity throughout their territory that was not strictly necessary. And, a list was made that Italian comrades are more aware of than I am of what were essential services. Funnily enough, stock markets did not make that list. What made the list should make us reflect on what kind of work actually sustained human lives and social well-being. Italy, like many states, many other states and governments, included the following on its essential services list: supermarkets, grocery stores, all shops selling food, pharmacies, production of medicines and medical equipment, transport for medical staff, garbage collection, teaching by distant learning, everything necessary to continue the supply of electricity, gas, water, and fuel. In other words, everything necessary for the maintenance of life. It has taken the tragedy of a global pandemic to reveal what capitalism likes to keep hidden, that the motor of the economy and society is human labor, not capital. We'll come back to the fact that, of course, these temporary measures that the government took, they tried as quickly as possible to revert back to business as usual. In the US, 52% of essential workers are women. That includes 77% of healthcare workers, social workers, and more than 2/3 of grocery store and fast food employees. And a vast majority of them are women of color. But not all public services were starved during neoliberalism. At the moment, in the US, public school systems across the country are forecasted to have up to $1 trillion in budget shortfalls. But in the past 30 years, police spending has grown by 445%. This funding boom is happened even though, according to the FBI, violent crime has steadily decreased since the 1990s. If you look at the amount of money that is spent on police at a city level, you can understand how staggering it is. In Oakland, California, 41% of the city's spending goes to policing. In Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered, 36% of the city's budget was meant for police. So let us concentrate for a fact that violent crime declined while the power and budget of the police increased. How do we make sense of this? And here we're grateful to abolitionists, especially Black abolitionists, feminists, who have offered us years of careful research, activism, and analysis to help us make sense of this strange fact. According to Critical Resistance, one such abolitionist organization, policing is, and I quote, a social relationship. What that means is that although police departments are tangible brick and mortar institutions, policing itself is a collection of various practices that change over time in order to do the job that the police are supposed to do under capitalism, which is enforce law and social control through the use of force. What does this mean in practice? It means that the state and the police propping up that state decide on what acts are criminal. They can thus invent new criminal offenses every day. This is my favorite example. One criminal offense is derelict vehicle in the driveway. This is a criminal offense. This crime of having a derelict vehicle in her driveway cost Louistine Hoskin, a Black woman in Ferguson, $1,200 in fines. This is also where scholar and abolitionist feminist Ruthie Gilmore's seminal foundation formulation on care work and policing is vital to understand policing as a social relationship. Ruthie urges us to understand why what she calls organized abandonment by the state has to necessarily pair with organized violence by that same state. In other words, when the state defunds healthcare, closes hospitals and schools in communities of color neighborhoods, when they consciously refuse to investigate whether the drinking water supply of a community has been contaminated, this organized abandonment of the community must be kept in place by organized violence. So policing need to penetrate areas of social life, such as schools, hospitals, parks, which as life-making spaces ought to have nothing to do with the death-making institution of the police. Disciplining communities of color, instilling fear and introducing violence into their lives, thus get woven into the fabric of social life. This is why anti-racism, along with anti-sexism, must be a conscious element to our struggles for life-making or expansion of our life-making institutions such as schools and hospitals. Many people in our labor movements across the world always call for more money for schools and hospitals as opposed to jails and police, saying that these are universalist demands that will benefit everyone. And of course, we support such demands. But if we do not make specifically anti-racist or anti-sexist demands, then we forget that women and people of color across the world have been consciously left out of the social contract. So moves to just consolidate that social contract through simple demands like more schools fail to get at how deeply racism is seeded in the workings of capitalism and its death drives. Consider this, it is often through a school, a life-making space that is supposed to nourish and excite a child's creativity, that a Black child in the US first comes into contact with the criminal justice system. In these extraordinary times then, how do you think we will fare without a banker? And now let us think how we would fare without a nurse or someone working at the supermarket. The pandemic has shown us in very clear terms the importance of care work and life-making work for the sustenance of life and society. For the first time in decades, governments took temporary, unusual measures to institutionalize this insight. They opened more hospitals, again, makeshift. They suspended the making of things that were unnecessary for life, and they distributed funds to help out families in need. It is not unfair to compare these government measures to war times, but when the crisis passes, we should be prepared to wage just such a battle against our rulers and the system they protect. We cannot go back to the old normal of mindlessly churning the wheels of commerce solely for the sake of profit and devastating our planet in the process. A new way of organizing society, nourished by the priorities of life-making, must become our new normal. Going forward, we must demand the following things. Workers who have to staff essential services such as nurses, supermarket staff, street cleaners, and others should be paid extra during the crisis. They're risking their life and their family's health. We call it pandemic pay. All private hospitals should be nationalized. Spain did it on a temporary basis, thereby admitting that private healthcare was unable to save lives. We must demand that such moves become universal and permanent. All mortgage and rent payment must be suspended during the pandemic. Free laptops and Wi-Fi at home and free lunch programs for all students when schools close is a very important aspect of how we can keep our schools and our families safe. Free childcare for parents who have to work. And of course, we must demand no deportation or immigration raid. Ireland put up a firewall in the spring between access to healthcare and immigration. This allowed undocumented people to access healthcare and welfare without fear of arrests, detention, or deportation. We must insist that, again, this measure becomes permanent. When a second wave builds, we should say that every building that is not housing humans for free, like hotels, rich people's second and third homes, need to be occupied to care for the homeless and the sick. Every building that is housing humans against their will, jails, prisons, internment camps, need to be abolished. And framing all of this, we must insist that there should be no curtailing of civil liberties using the virus as an excuse. Only capitalism could have invented a phrase, social isolation, to deal with a crisis. From a system that thrives on alienation and atomization, this should come as no surprise. But we cannot afford to socially isolate ourselves and build barriers against each other, either materially or politically. So we have already seen unprecedented flourishing of organized and spontaneous acts of care and solidarity amongst ordinary people. This is the kind of work that people have done organizing neighborhoods and citywide mutual aid networks to care for each other have been astonishing. This is why we should be calling for physical isolation, but social solidarity. I also want to add that while mutual aid networks are wonderful and affirm our basic humanity, the population as a whole should not have to depend on mutual aid networks. These are the kind of work that governments and our taxes ought to be paying for. But in these ruinous times, there are still luminous acts of anti-capitalism. Entire regions are devising novel ways to care for each other. Educators are offering free online lessons. Nurses are going into heavily policed demonstrations to help take care of tear gas victims. The instinct for care and solidarity is what makes us human, and we cannot let capitalism make us forget that. We are creating beauty even when our surroundings have been vandalized by profit. This crisis, beyond the shadow of a doubt, has shown us that care work makes all work possible. Our job now is to ensure that all politics become the politics of care. Imagine what would happen if we refused to go back to work if our demands were not made. Could they survive without us? So while we help each other through this, let us also plan our future. We need to physically isolate ourselves. We need to politically isolate the rich. And we need to fight like hell for a society that values life making over profit making. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tithi. And now it's time for debate. Anyone who wants to speak must ask in the chat, writing her name, country, or organization, pronoun they want to be referred to, and language they're going to use. And you can also ask questions by writing in the chat, and it's 3 or 4 questions. Tithi will answer. Anybody wants to start?
Maybe if folks could talk about how organizing, what kind of organizing you've been doing through the pandemic, that would be really helpful. You don't have to ask me a question. Just tell us about your experience, maybe. I would love to learn.
Hello. Hello, all. I am Ika from Indonesia. Maybe I can share experience and show my expression about what just Titi presenting. Okay. Actually, I am still processing and because the situation that Titi talked about and shows is actually so true. I mean, if I try to relate with the current situation in Indonesia, like we are in the emergence of sexual violence cases, and the fight for this bill actually have been like 5 years ago, but still now, but until now, it is very difficult to ratify. And the case uh, is the same with the other bill that actually people really need it, like the domestic workers bill, which is actually fight for 11 years ago, and until now, it's still difficult to ratify it in the House of Parliament. And the government, and in the contrary, I mean, in the midst of this pandemic, where I mean, every day in our cases is like 1,000, more than, sorry, not 1,000, but 1,000 tau. Yeah, sorry, sorry for my English. So it's 1,000. Ya kan ya? I'm confused. Sorry. So more than 1,000 cases every day now in Indonesia. And there is no like prioritizing this virus, I mean, how to handle, but the government in the Jokowi's era, he and the government would like to ratify the omnibus law. Like this is the law that to stimulate the foreign investment to Indonesia, and the government saying that this is how we provide jobs. So we should attract the foreign investment. And okay, there will be a job, but job with no longer social insurance, job that will, I mean, the job with the lower wage that, I mean, before pandemic, it's already worse. I mean, the workers, the women workers, the domestic workers, the informal workers, which is more of most of them are women. It's already in the worst situation, and when we collect data, when we talk with the workers, what are they concerned now is how they can get job after the pandemic. Not because of the layoff, but because of their age, for example. Because when they are in the above 30 years old, they afraid not to get job. So this is the situation that is happening now in our current, I mean, yeah, in Indonesia now. So that is actually true. How we implement the social reproduction theory. But my maybe this is also a question. I mean, how is, I mean, or maybe Tithi can give a comment how our criticism can create a hope for this situation. Maybe Tithi can give some comment. I mean, yeah, there's a huge protest. There's a huge mobilization around the world, and how you see this is a hope and can change the system. I think that's sharing and also a question from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ika. Now, Freya from Denmark in Danish.
Okay. Jeg prøver at snakke, tænker jeg. Bare lige så vi kan sikre os, at den engelske for mikrofonen. Bye. Yes. Er det bedre nu? Jeg prøver bare at snakke lidt igen. Og du må gerne sige til, når jeg bare skal begynde at snakke. Jeg bliver bare ved med at snakke, så at jeg ved, at Ina kan høre mig. Så kan jeg også få lov til at være the voice of the revolution. All right, I'm just, all right, Ina tells me that just in order for you to make sure that the translation is working, I'm just going to, all right. 2 seconds. I'm just going to, because right now I have the Danish interpretation in my ears, and that's going to be really confusing if I'm going to talk in English. All right. I wanted to share some of our experiences we have had here in Denmark during lockdown. So when the lockdown was enforced, some of the groups that were hit the hardest were precarious workers. I'm a precarious worker too. I work as a substitute teacher at a school on a 0-hour contract, which is also a field that is heavily dominated by women. And we were in the position that we didn't get any government aid, any compensation for lost salary at all. And at the same time, there's the rule in Denmark that if you're under 30, you receive a lower unemployment benefit compared to if you're over 30. So especially young women were in a hard position, in a tough position. And at the same time, we were also, ironically enough, labeled essential workers, but we were just not the essential workers that the government prioritized to help. So they could use our labor, but didn't want to give us any security. So also when the government decided that schools, kindergartens, nurseries had to reopen, we were some of the first that were called back to work. But at the same time, if we got sick, because we work on 0-hour contracts, we're not entitled to sick pay. So we were, in a very, very precarious position. And then we were a group that tried to organize around that and make a like political collective consisting of people working on 0-hour contracts. It was also very clear to see of the people we managed to mobilize and the people who were central in the group, that those people were all women. And yes, I just wanted to hear also if some of you have similar experiences, both other other people in the call, or if you, Tati, have some examples from the States. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to read the message from Diane Freely. It says, I am active in Detroit eviction defense. Our demand has been to extend the moratorium to 60 days beyond the emergency. But now, both at the federal and state level, the moratorium is over. And when the court opens on August 18, landlords can start the process of eviction. We are leafleting with masks on and socially distancing neighborhoods with local community organizations. There are many such organizations around the country, but right now the main fight is around whether schools will open. Teachers are demanding that to do so, the virus has been contained. It is now continuing to grow, and that there be massive resources for schools. Of course, the massive resources, and of course, federal and state governments need the schools open so that people can go to work. No need to speak. Diane, Solidarity Detroit. Pedro Gava from Comuna, Brazil, asks, Tithi, can you talk about the possible connections between the current ideologic conservatism on a worldwide scale, anti-feminist, racist, anti-LGBT rights, etc., and the situation of the nuclear family? How social reproduction theory can help us explain this rise of? I don't know if you prefer to answer now or wait until there are more questions.
No, I'll answer.
Okay.
Well, so let me start with a question first, which is the relationship between the rise of conservatism and the nuclear social reproduction theory explain and the situation of the nuclear family. Okay, so I don't think that the conservative governments arose to preserve the nuclear family. The conservative governments are a response. There are a couple of things that they're responding to, the sort of right-wing populism. One is the failure of neoliberalism. You know, all of these right-wing governments have this sort of ethno-nationalist language, right? That globalization has failed us. What we need is a strong Poland, or what we need is a strong US first, and make America great again. So Modi is the same. And of course, in order to have a strong ethno-nationalist base, you need to scapegoat those that you deem to be not part of your nation state. So there is a kick to, you know, there's a wave across the EU and across the globe to harden border controls and, you know, what they like to call the migrant crisis, what I like to call the murder of displaced populations and drowning them in seas. So that is a major thing. It's an effect of neoliberalism that we are now seeing in the rise of right-wing governments. But the nuclear family does play an important role in the consolidation of these ideas of ethno-nationalism and conservatism, because the nuclear family is the place, is the institution that is vital for the maintenance of capitalism, because the nuclear family is where the next generation of workers are reproduced, both in the physical sense of being born, but also in the more social sense of being taken care of within the home by unwaged care work, mostly performed by women, but also sort of how their labor power is trained, in the sense that, you know, it is the nuclear family from where work, you know, schools, hospitals, etc. All of these institutions actually feed back into the nuclear family and the life-making processes of the future generation of workers. So the nuclear family is very, very, very vital to capitalism. And so when this wave of right-wing populism, you know, flashes across the globe, the nuclear family and the discourse of the nuclear family becomes very handy. It becomes very useful for capitalism to use by saying, you know, man, woman, child, you know, strong family values, you know, because if you think about it, all queer relationships actually threaten the stability of the nuclear family. If you could bring up a child between trans people living in a commune, then you have no need for the nuclear family, right? So then it threatens any kind of queer living, any kind of queer identity threatens the stability of the nuclear family. So during times of crisis, family values become a very important tool in actually class war that the ruling class wages. Okay, so this is where gender becomes a tool of class war. So that's the relationship between the nuclear family and the rising right. And it is not a coincidence that all these right-wing governments are extremely sexist and anti-queer.
Thank you, Tithi. Now there's another question of Pedro, but I understand it's like a continuation of the one before. It says, how SRP, social reproduction, can help us explain the rise of conservatism and what are the challenges and some of our tasks in order to confronting the situation in a capitalist perspective. I believe you had already answered that. Next one is Chiara in English. So please, Chiara.
Hi, everyone. And first of all, thank you so much.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I miss Rania before in English.
Hey, hey everyone, and thank you for your intervention because it was so helpful to me to get back to me some hope. I'm queer intersectional feminist in Tunisia, and during the coronavirus and the sanitary crisis in general in Tunisia, we had as queer bodies and as queer activists, we have undergone a lot of problems with institutions, with government, and even with colonial and racist other governments such as France. And for me, renewing social reproduction theory in the shadow of neoliberalism, it's hopeful for me as queer feminist living in one of the countries of the South. But I think we have always to relate it and to concentrate on the categories of oppression such as race, gender, ableism, social class. And to concentrate on the interconnected processes of oppression, either institutional oppression or social or economic or colonial oppression. So during the sanitary crisis, it was a lot of capitalism, cis heteronormativity, classism, labor power, and colonial power, and a lot of power dynamics who want to not only erase that queer people live in Tunisia and they need other help, a lot of help, different kind of helps than the nuclear family, because for me the nuclear family, it's like the essential and the fuel of the dominance and the visibility and the oppression of the system of the Tunisian government, because it was in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. It was a lot of forced outing campaigns on social media targeting queer activists and queer people, because this cis heteronormative and nuclear family used the lockdown to concentrate to attack vulnerable categories and vulnerable people who are marginalized and who are criminalized by law. So they have used the oppression, institutional and judicial and juridical power and oppression to out people and being kicked out during the sanitary crisis from their home, from their shelter, either Tunisian queer activists or either queer refugees. And I think the relation between social reproduction theory and how to smash the neoliberal and capitalist system is related to other oppressions and sub-oppressions of subgroups who are living and experimenting different struggle from people who are living in South countries, in North countries, and the dichotomy of South and North. So, and during to this this events and this incidents of a lot of campaigns of hate, online hate, and hate speech and physical attacks toward feminist or queer people, we had lived that a lot of scientists and doctors and even institutions in France, they want to experiment vaccines or scientific experience on Africa on like African bodies. So we thought we felt that we are alienated. We're not seen as human. We are seen as dehumanized bodies. So they were allowed to experiment whatever they want to save the white cis men. So it was a lot of how to say, a lot of degrees of oppression, a lot of types of oppression. It was like intersectional oppression. I believe as our fight, it is intersectional because the oppression, it is already intersectional. It's smashing as in our corners, in our homes, with nationalist governments, or either with governments with from the north countries with their colonialism and their colonial heritage or their colonial objectives. So we are facing, as queer activists in Tunisia, we're facing homonationalism, feminationalism as international level, and racism and ethnophobic and ethno alienation on the international level during the lockdown. And on the national level, we were worried on our safety because there's like an article in the penal code of Tunisia who are criminalizing queer people and non-normative life here in general. So we are facing a lot of struggle at the same time, adding to mental health problems and a lot of précarité. I used French term because I didn't find the word in English, but like not poverty, man, when the system works to make you poor. That's the definition of the word, and I say it in French. And your intervention helped me to renew hope in me as a feminist and queer activist. And I think we need more international solidarity networks. We need more action on the international level. We need more queer people from US, from France, from Europe to help queer people in South countries. That's it. And merci.
Thank you very much. And now it goes Chiara in English, please.
Okay, here I am. So thank you everyone for sharing their updates about their countries, and thank you Tithi for this presentation, because to me, more than shedding even more light on topics that have been so familiar to us for months now, it really does give hope, I think, and it's really motivational, and for me at least, makes me understand how important it is to just keep fighting, aside from connecting and reflecting, but just take the steps to do something about it. And so this idea, this call that you made at the end of your presentation to refuse to go back to work if our demands are not met, it really made me think of the potential of the women's strikes. So just how we could stop all the activities, and mostly care activities and essential work activities, so feminized activities, let's say, and just stop all of that and use that as leverage to make pressure. But first, I also wanted to share a brief update from Rome. I'm part of a LGBT and feminist collective within a mutual aid social space in Rome. And during the pandemic, during the lockdown, we decided to open up an information point for care workers especially cleaners and care workers that help the elderly. And these are basically 90% migrants, and the white majority is, of course, women. And for now, it served as a platform to inform them about economic help from the government, for example, or to inform them about any kind of protest that was happening in the city, for example, to demand unconditional base income, or what's from the Italian feminism we call self-determination income. But now I'm thinking that maybe we should also kind of use that more to do what you're saying. So, or I think that you're saying, so just refuse to go back to that normality with really concrete ways of protest. So just refusing to go back to work or show our resistance in any other more concrete way. And I'm just really grateful to hear all of these updates from around the world. And I agree with Rania that we should increase these global alliances. And again, this idea of the strike made me think of the BDS movement, and also what we can do from the North to just connect and show our support, for example, in the situation of the annexation and occupation of Palestine. And so just to keep this tension and attention on these issues now more than ever. And yeah, that's it. So thank you very much again to you and to everyone.
Okay, thank you, Gera. I believe you've finished. Next one is Dreamers, in Portuguese or English. I don't know which one you prefer.
Português. English.
Yeah, they're saying that English is easier for the translation. So,
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'll try. But I would like first to thank Tithi for always being so inspiring. And I am from Rio, Rio de Janeiro. And here it has been, in Brazil, the violence against women has been rising like crazy since the start of the pandemic. But also since women are in our country, they are most of them are informal workers. There has been a lot of problems managing to feed families, and women are also mostly head of families here. And since the beginning of the year, there has been a lot of pressure to go back to activities as normal. And Bolsonaro has also used the fact that we could not go to the streets to increase his fascist propaganda. But inspired in the anti-racist protests around the globe, we managed to also go to the streets with anti-fascist and anti-racist militants and activists, and we managed to make a counter position that was really important. And we also managed to pass a law that says that the government has to pay a minimum wage to all the workers, but it's been really hard to actually maintain this. And the violence against Black people in the favelas was also rising a lot. So it has been a very difficult time. But we in Rio also managed to pass a law that says that police cannot do these, I don't know how to say this, but they cannot go into the favelas and just like shoot everyone like they usually do during the pandemic, which was really important, but it also has not been respected as it should be.
So it has been really hard, and now they are talking about economic activities has been back, even though the pandemic is still really strong. And the teachers are organizing a strike in Rio, which we are calling Strike for Life, to make sure that the schools don't come back as normal. But it's also really hard because women are like having a really hard time at home to maintain their homes, and we cannot we can I think we can say that we would like everyone to have computers and to be able to study from home, but the reality is really different, and it's not like it's a real possibility for everyone in Brazil to have computers and internet on such short notice. But I mean, of course we should fight for it, but it becomes a contradiction, and if you could talk more about that, it would be great. And also, I would like to say that's really important for internationally for everyone to support the Fora Salles, which is our environment minister, which has been devastating Amazonia and all the people there. So that's it. I'm sorry if it was a bit confusing. It's hard to speak in English.
Thank you very much.
I can respond a little bit. So it was very good. I didn't have any trouble understanding you. Thank you so much for your contribution. And thank you to all of you. Inma, I have to go soon because I'll tell you the story, which is part of the chain of things that we've been talking about. So in my university, as soon as the pandemic hit, the various administrative people started using the virus as an excuse to cut jobs and cut academic programming, right? So my program, Global Studies, is a largely women majority program, and we deal with, global capitalist issues and borders and things. So my program, along with African American studies, women's studies, were all dismantled. Okay. And so we've been organizing against that, and we've had tremendous support from the campus and community. So that's part of, what I'm fighting right now. So I'm constantly on organizing calls. So you'll excuse me if I have to leave. But I wanted to respond first to the comrade from Tunisia to talk about the importance of queer organizing in this moment, because as I said that, we're talking about the strengthening of the nation state along with this discourse of the family values. And one of the things that we definitely need to do in our feminist movement is revive the old slogan of abolishing the family. Now, the family plays a dual role, just like religion does in under capitalism. On the one hand, the family is the theater of violence. Okay, so queer children know this best, but also women. All the worst aspects of capitalist violence gets sort of pressure cooker like into the nuclear family, right? So we know how violent the family can be and how deep the scars we can carry from our childhoods about oppression, right? So, but on the other hand, families are also the spaces where we gain support from the outside world. So it plays this contradictory role of both, sort of a cruel tool as well as the heart in a heartless world. So that's why, you know, Marx and Engels, along with early feminists, Marxist feminists like Alexandra Kollontai, really understood that political nature of the family and basically argued that the family needs to be abolished. Now, you know, in the early 20th century, it was not in the dawn, and especially in the 19th century, what we mean by the abolition of family was not entirely clear. Okay, so some of the things were very clear. So for instance, if you see in Kollontai's writing, one of the ways to abolish family is to make social reproduction into a common good. So instead of having your private kitchens where you're constantly slaving away, you have public kitchens, you have public places where food can be distributed and so on, and we all share in the cooking and so on. And so, you know, public laundries. So taking housework out of the house and making it public was one way to abolish the power of the family. But in the early 21st century, as we look at the family as an institution, I think we have a lot to be grateful to for queer comrades around the world giving us models of what the abolition of a family must look like, right? So these models at such a scale, I mean, this is not to say that queer people in the 20th century or the 19th century did not have these models. Of course they did, but they were not as public and they were not as widespread as they are now. So I think we have a lot to learn from the queer collectives and the various experimentations that queer collectives do in what it means to be family, you know, like, so nobody is saying, when Marxists say that we want to abolish the family, nobody is saying that we want to abolish love and care of humans. In fact, what we are saying is that the heteronormative bourgeois family actually stifles love and caring, does not allow real love and caring to flourish. So we do want spaces where that love and caring flourishes. We can call it whatever we want, but we do not want the heteronormative family. So that's kind of the way I see the difference and the gains we have made from Marx's time to ours, and the kind of models that we now have operating around the world for us to learn from and to implement. About the Wi-Fi situation, I completely agree with you. Okay, so this is for my family and my comrades in India, this is really the issue. Okay, my mother is in Delhi. My sister works for a trade union, and my mother is nearing 80. Okay, and so it's really hard for, she lives with my sister and my little niece, and my sister has to go to work because she works for a trade union. I mean, you know, they can't stop in the middle of a crisis. And the question becomes, how do we protect people in India, people in Brazil, many families who do not have the capacity to buy laptops, and also, even if they do have capacity to buy laptops, many families will not have capacity to buy broadband, you know, and you need a broadband connection to really do online classes. So the solution, I don't know what the solution is, but to me, the solution should be that unless this infrastructure is provided for our families, we should not, as teachers and as carers, we should not go back to work, okay? So I'll give you an example of the Chicago Teachers Union, which is a very militant teachers union in the United States. The Chicago mayor, unfortunately, a Black lesbian woman, but completely neoliberal. She has been fighting with the union basically to force them to open schools and offer in-person classes. Now, in the US, thankfully, there is capacity to send laptops home, not like fancy laptops, but Chromebooks home to students in the school district, okay? Many of us have donated, old computers to the school district so that they can be shared among students. So in the US, that capacity exists. So the school unions are insisting that that the schools not be reopened in person. Instead, these laptops be distributed to students and all students do online education. The mayor fought it like hell, okay? So what did CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union, say? We are going to ballot for strike action. The day they declared the balloting for strike action, that day the mayor declared that schools can go online. So protest and a threat to strike always works. And particularly, I think it will work now even better because we're coming in the end of a huge wave of global protests, which absolutely scared the ruling class, okay? Ruling classes across the globe got scared by the intensity and rage of our anti-racist protests, okay? This is the time, comrades, that we can ride that wave and bring that wave of anti-capitalist thinking into our workplaces, okay? Because if you've been in the protests of the recent times, if you've been tear gassed, you know that the ruling class is ready to give in only when we go out in large numbers and only when we organize collectively. So I think it's time to get the wave of George Floyd murder protests into our workplaces and absolutely refuse to go back to work till we have a safe opening for our workplaces, our schools, and our childcare centers. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Tithi, for the motivational talk. We will consider your proposal. I think that now it's time to finish. And thank you everybody for attending this talk. And remember the upcoming events, which are educational tomorrow at 6 p.m., learning from LGBT struggles, making changes in times of crisis by Terry Conway. On Saturday, we have another educational at 5 p.m. Black Lives Matter, Structural Racism and White Privilege by Mama Duva and Sofia Rosa. And on Sunday, we have a roundtable at 5 p.m. And the title is Now We Fight, Struggles to Change the World. Activists from 8 Argentina, Hong Kong, and Black Lives Matter. So thank you everybody for being here and see you on the next educational.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Good luck with all your struggles. Solidarity.